Do you know what an extreme taker is? I'm sure all of you have somebody in your life that you would consider an extreme taker. I'm going to give you a few personality traits of an extreme taker. They're usually focused on themselves, meaning when you go to them with issues that you're dealing with in your life, it always seems to come back to what they're dealing with. You really feel a sense of confusion when you leave them, as if you haven't understood the conversation or the relationship. What I'm talking about is a narcissist. And narcissism comes on a spectrum. So there are low traits and there are high traits. There are different forms of narcissist. We have the grandiosity of a narcissism, then we have a covert narcissism. So this is a variety, and there's a spectrum between low and high. Today, what we're going to talk about on Grief Unfiltered is an extreme taker. And the reason I want to use that term is because in our lives and in who we all have somewhat of these traits. But an extreme taker, they seem to leave you feeling like you're at fault for something, that they've sucked every ounce of energy out of you, that you're wrong, and that you perhaps are misunderstanding something. The best way to understand an extreme taker or a narcissist is you walk away and never, ever find resolution. You never find a meeting of the minds, the ability to apologize to each other, say you're sorry, and have a deep understanding of the relationship. I welcome you today. I'm Christine Dernederlanden, and I've been in the area of grief and bereavement and trauma for over 24 years. So today's episode, we're going to look at the grief that is brought on by having an extreme taker in our lives. And again, extreme taker is a narcissist, and that can be a parent, mother, father, could be a sibling, so a brother or sister. It could be a friend in our lives. It could be a spouse. And how you're grieving that individual could be that you emotionally, physically, legally may have walked out and said, I can no longer have this relationship. They may have died. And that comes with its own set of horrific emotions and grief, because you have to remember there's no resolution. So in today's episode, we're going to explore 4 ways to help you, the listener, work your way through the grief that's brought on by an extreme taker, a narcissist. So as we dive in to looking at the grief of a extreme taker or narcissist, the grief that we experience with unlived relationships, and that's really what we're talking about. Because when we are with individuals who we cannot find that connection or resolution, meeting of the minds, and being able to have an understanding of what the conflict may have been or a more deeper relationship, we are grieving an unlived relationship. This is a relationship that you perhaps wanted to have with somebody. You may have always felt like, I don't necessarily click with them. And you've had to walk away from this individual. This person may be toxic for you, and you may not even realize that. And you can Google so many different personality traits of a narcissist or an extreme taker, and you'll learn all about gaslighting, the cycle of narcissism, and, the hoovering stage. There's so much you can Google. But in Grief Unfiltered, I really want to focus in on the grief of this individual. So, what are the ways that you would be grieving an extreme taker or a narcissist? Well, what we mainly focus on is grief. So, if an individual in your life, which could have been your parent, so we're going to say, for argument's sake, a parent who was an extreme taker. As a child, You may have not ever felt like you were enough. You were never enough. And it was always about them. And that could be they were always sick. They were always worried about their work. You never felt like you were heard. It was always your fault. And you've tried desperately to have a relationship. You never felt closure or resolution to arguments with these individuals. And then that individual dies. That's tough. And that in itself carries a lot of pain and emotional turmoil. Another form of losing an extreme taker or narcissist is through divorce. This could be a spouse that you were married to for years and you lived in a fictitious world that this was a wonderful relationship and it never really made sense. Some days you were like, no, I think they really said that. And then you go back to the extreme taker or the narcissist, and they go, I don't know what you're talking about. That never happened. That becomes really hard. This is a play in your mind, a play with your heart. Um, and you're constantly trying to figure out, like, what's the truth? What's not the truth? Am I crazy or am I not crazy? That can be so extremely hard. I have an episode of Grief Uprooted coming up. It's the next episode. And Shelley, um, I really love this about Uprooted. And one of the ways I wanted to deliver the podcast is I don't know people's grief stories until they get on the podcast. And I think I was a wee bit floored with Shelley because she talks about how she found out that her husband was having an affair. And this level of grief, being married to an extreme taker, she she was devastated. And she walks us through her healing. But as I was listening to her talk, I could see the numerous layers of grief where she had to grieve so many different layers of that relationship. So, recap, we could have an individual die in our life that's an extreme taker or narcissist, or we could choose to divorce an extreme taker or narcissist. And the third relationship that we may have in our life, it may be a friend. And often we all have that friend who's sometimes you think they're just always focused on themselves. They're always talking about these things. And when you go for that help, with that individual, like to say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with in my life. This is what I'm struggling with. That seems to always go back to them. Or they disappear for a period of time and then they show up in your life again. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, like I'm only here when you need me. So we all have these people in our lives. And for periods of time, we can tolerate it. We figure out ways to get around it. Again, you can Google, learn about gray rocking and things like that, where you can learn how to handle these people in your life. It's exceptionally helpful if you're in a workforce where these people exist, then you know how to handle them. But the relationships we're talking about here, such as a friendship, and then you decide to cut that friendship off and walk away, divorce, or from a parent or loved one dying who is one of these extreme takers and narcissists, that's a lot different. A lot different. When we're talking about work environments, we can learn different techniques, how to deal with different personalities, and we can leave it at work. Now, sometimes it can become extremely hard, and we need to go to human resource and be like, I can't deal with this individual. Or if you have a boss like that, it can be extremely hard. But today for Grief Unfiltered, we're going to focus in on these three. So when we are grieving these relationships, when we talk about the death of an extreme taker or narcissist, what really happens is it's layered. It's very layered. It's compounded grief because one, we're sitting there grieving the death of a loved one. Two, the death of an unlived relationship. And three, the death of ever finding that resolution. So I'm going to say that again. The death, and we're grieving the death of a loved one. Then we're looking at grieving an unlived relationship. And then we're grieving that we're never going to find that resolution and our understanding in that relationship. That is extremely hard, because the finality of death. And at times we'll lose hope and thinking and trying to understand that relationship. The rumination process for somebody grieving an extreme taker or narcissist can be debilitating. Just going over the stories and the words and was I nice? And I always felt like I was wrong. And did they really love me? It's extremely hard, extremely. But we're going to look at 4 ways to help you through that. The second relationship we talked about was divorcing an extreme taker or narcissist. And this too comes layered. And how this comes layered, and you definitely see it in the episode coming up after this in Grief Uprooted with Shelley, that she really explains the layered effect of grieving a relationship with an extreme taker or narcissist. And how she explains that is grieving the life she thought she had, the life she was kind of living in a bubble, thinking it was perfect and everything was okay. Then she was grieving herself, that she no longer was that person anymore, that she needed to become and evolve and change, to start a new beginning. But then she also had the grief of the family, of her children, and how this was going to affect them. The last relationship we talked about was a friendship. Again, extreme takers, narcissism, it comes layered. You are grieving the fact that you thought you had this amazing relationship with this person, but there was always this little doubt. And now that doubt is a reality. If you've walked away from this relationship, or you've said, I need to take a break from this relationship, and that individual doesn't even come back to say, hey, what's going on? I know so many of you have actually wrote in or made comments on Facebook where you're like, how do you walk away from an extreme taker or narcissist? Like, what are you supposed to do? This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to text them and say, look, I'm not feeling comfortable with this relationship. I'm feeling a real disconnect. And I'm wondering if we need time apart, wondering if we need our space. And I think I would like to take a break from this relationship. I've done this. I really have. And the people who value me and value my relationships immediately respond with, whoa, what's going on? Let's get together for tea or coffee. And we have a conversation. And that's what relationships are about. There's always conflict in relationships. It's part of it. And that's okay, because it gives you an opportunity to go deeper with that individual, learn more about them. Your narcissist or extreme taker? What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with our relationship. I think there's something wrong with you. What are you going through? Are you feeling sad? They never take blame. And so what ends up happening to you, who is grieving this friendship that you thought you had, it's like reality slaps you in the face. And now you're grieving this relationship you thought you had. And then on top of that, sometimes comes a level of anger that you're grieving that, why did I fall for that? Why did I do that? So it's kind of like grieving the self a bit. So again, it becomes layered. In all these different relationships, and no matter which grief you're dealing with, grieving a narcissist or extreme taker is extremely layered. And it can be layered for different reasons for each person. So Those are the type of relationships that we're going to explore next. And we are going to actually look at 4 ways that you, the listener, can help yourself through this process. Um, okay, so here we go. Number 1, acknowledge the grief of the unlived relationship. Now, in all of those, that's what we need to look at first. We need to look at this relationship that truly didn't exist. Um, and that's the hardest part with uh, extreme takers and narcissism is in our head, we keep thinking it's our fault, or individual thinks it's their fault, and constantly going, "It's my fault." And when you try to find resolution with these individuals or talk to them, they agree with you. Yeah, maybe it's you, and so you go through this cycle. And when helping people through that type of grief, it's really hard because they've been conditioned to believe it's their fault, especially if you're a child of an extreme taker. And I'm here to tell you it's not your fault. Communication does exist, and that communication goes back and forth. And that's how we do it. We banter and we figure it out. So, one of the best ways is when we are grieving this version that we hope to have exist in this individual's life. So we're going to take a parent for an example. You hoped as a child you were a very large piece of a parent's life. You hoped for existence in this life, and you dreamed of growing up and they accepting who you are. And finally saying, "I'm proud of you. You are my child, and I am so proud of you." And it just never came. It just never did. And one of the best ways to do this is to acknowledge that you're never going to hear that from that individual. That's the key. You're never going to hear it from your parent, but you're going to hear it from you. You're going to be able to look at yourself and go, "I'm proud of you." In today's world, we have totally stopped loving ourselves. We really have. We really have stopped saying to ourselves, "I love you and I'm proud of you." When we're grieving, you need to stop and say, "You know what? You're grieving. I love you. I'm so proud of you for waking up today," and keep walking one foot in front of another. So, the very first thing we want to do is really look at the unlived relationship, whether that was to hear that spouse say, "You're my only one. I've never cheated. I've never done this. You're it." And you will never hear that. You'll never be able to gain an understanding or have a resolution with that. So we need to let that go. We may need to say it out loud. If we're looking at a parent hoping we existed and they're proud of us, we may never hear that, especially if our parent died. So we have to be able to grieve that unattainable, that unattainable love and acceptance, unconditional love and acceptance from somebody that we so badly wanted it from. It just doesn't come. And that in itself is grief. Number 2, I think this is the hardest for majority of my clients and working with people, and that is detach yourself from the need to be understood. I've seen so many times with working with couples or working with large groups of people where we're constantly wanting to be understood. We're wanting to hear. You're just kind of like verbal diarrhea. You're just spewing out all this stuff, hoping this extreme taker, our narcissist, is gonna go, "Yes, I understand. Yes, I totally understand you, and I get it, and I understand what you're saying to me." Um, it just it will never come. And we need to detach from that need to be understood by these people. If we're in a relationship, in a friendship, with an individual, and we were constantly feeling like we're never understood, they never see my point of view. Um, it's kind of like there was an old term years ago used, we agree to disagree. And that makes sense. There are people out there that can have relationships or friendships and be, we agree to disagree. But wouldn't it be nice to understand why you disagree? What is it that the other person sees that you don't see? And have that in-depth conversation. And then kind of go, okay, I think I understand why your perception is that way and why my perception is this way. And we just never get that with extreme takers. And in that relationship, what you're wanting to do when you're grieving, and number two, is to detach from the need to be understood. It's just not going to come. Nobody is going to be able to look at you, or extreme taker or narcissist is not going to look at you and say, I understand. That part of the wound is not going to heal. And we need to be able to let it go and grieve it. And sometimes this causes us to want to protect our hearts, to not put our hearts out there again because we felt like we were vulnerable and this person took something that we felt vulnerable with and just went, I don't get it. But don't allow that to happen to yourself. It's not worth it. There's so many people in the world that think like you, that are like you. You're not alone. And find those people because they're there, they exist. And you'll be able to have that in-depth conversation and you will be understood. So this is the second thing we're grieving is being understood. So the first is the unlived relationship. The second is the need to be understood. Number three, so you're going to start building boundaries like a fortress. You really are. Because when we walk away from extreme takers or a narcissist, what happens is, I'm never going to do that again. I can't believe I allowed myself to do that. I can't believe I was constantly helping that person, but I never felt like they were there for me. Why did I do this? Why was I in a marriage for 15 years and I never saw it? I will, I have all these boundaries because my parent just never could be proud of me. And I have this anxiety. Like it just is never ending. So you start to build this fortress of boundaries around you. And, you want to break that down. We think of them as emotional armor. And, you know, you want to be able to look at this fortress that you've built. And what we want to do is what ones make sense and what ones don't. So in grief, as we all know, our prefrontal cortex at times will go into fight, flight, fight, flight, fear, fawn. That took a little bit. And so when we fall under that survival mode, we start to really put up like, I'm never going to do this again. I'm not going to ever expose myself again. You don't want to do that. What you really want to do and give yourself time. Don't think you're going to do this overnight. Put in boundaries that really protect you. Be able to say to somebody, I'm coming out of a relationship or I'm grieving the death, or I just divorced an extreme taker or narcissist. And I need to keep some boundaries in place. And it's not like you're being cold to individual. You're just being safe. You're giving yourself some space, some distance before jumping into another relationship where you feel not understood, where you feel that you're being vulnerable and not receiving it back, and you don't find that resolution. And so we want to look at number three as building emotional boundaries, but we don't want them to be this extreme fortress that we don't allow anybody in. But boundaries are so important. And usually the people that are with extreme takers or narcissists are very empathetic. They have a lot of empathy, or they're caretakers. Um, and so a lot of those people don't have boundaries. A lot of them just want to caretake. And when you're very empathetic and can connect with individuals, they tend to um, really want to help, really want to be there for people, and lose sight of what that is doing to you as an individual. Number four, begin the journey. Begin the journey of self reclamation. Find yourself again. Bring yourself back. And who are you now after going through this experience of having a relationship with somebody? A lot of times, people I've worked with don't even realize that their parent, their sibling, their best friend, their spouse is an extreme taker. They've just been living like this their whole lives. And they just always felt like they were never good enough. They always felt like they could never grasp an understanding of that individual or that resolution. So they spent their lives just consistently going around in a circle wondering why. And all of a sudden, it could be a death. It could be the discovery of an affair. It could be some sort of trauma that hits you, that you all of a sudden look at a best friend and say, I don't want this relationship anymore. Something happens that causes your mind, your heart, and your gut to go, this relationship isn't good for me. And now at number four, we really want to look at how are we going to build ourselves up again? And the next episode, Shelly, I've talked about her a little bit here. She starts a practice. I'm going to try to actually say it. It's called Ho'oponopono. It's the Hawaiian practice of forgiveness. This Hawaiian practice actually comes with four pillars, and in the episode, we talk about that. We kind of look at all those pillars. But another individual that actually uses this is Nicole. She's a recent guest who also has talked about this Hawaiian practice. And it's the release of guilt, shame, and ancestral pain carried from generations before. And they talk about rebuilding their lives, piece by piece, day by day. And I really enjoyed how they really focused on self-forgiveness, and how that when we are reclaiming our lives and who we are, that they visited their childhood, their inner child. They moved towards their teen years. They moved towards being a young adult. It was actually like very much a cleansing process where they were like, okay, who am I really? And why do I need why do I need to be understood by this person? Why do I need this person to say they're proud of me? Why can't I fulfill this for myself? And that's one of the key questions, right? Um, can we provide for ourselves all these things that we are expecting from these relationships with extreme takers or narcissists? So, to review, when we are grieving the death of an extreme taker or narcissist, when we are grieving the divorce from an extreme taker or narcissist, and when we are grieving the end of a friendship with an extreme taker or narcissist, there are four things that help you along the way. Number one was acknowledging the grief of the unlived relationship. The relationship was not what you expected it was to be. And a lot of times we've made that up in our minds and thought it was better than it really was. So we're grieving that unlived relationship. Number two, detach from that need to be understood. You will not be understood. That resolution will not come. Number three, build emotional boundaries. Build those emotional boundaries and do not build brick walls around yourself. Be able to let people in, but it also be able to express that this is the person I was with before and I'm scared. And let me tell you, when you meet the right people, they will completely understand that and you'll move at a pace that works for you. And number four, begin that journey of self reclamation. Find yourself again. And that journey encompasses all four of these. Being able to allow yourself to grieve, express that grief however you need to express that, and be able to acknowledge it and understand that you are grieving these relationships. These four steps will help you on that process. Grief tied to narcissism is invisible to most people. No one is going to send you flowers. No one is going to bring meals to your home because it's invisible grief. It's so invisible that we don't acknowledge it in society. But I'm here to tell you, you're not alone. Absolutely not alone. Extreme takers and narcissists exist, and grieving them is extremely hard. And that process is not taken lightly. And if you are grieving this type of individual who has either died, a divorce, or the end of a friendship, know that you're not alone. My next episode on Grief Uprooted talks about this, and you can listen to real life stories of individuals who are like you, the listener, who is grieving that extreme taker or narcissist. And it is invisible in our society, but know that it's real and that your grief does matter. Your grief story matters. I want to say thank you for tuning in today. And if this episode resonates with you, or you think it would resonate with a family member or a friend, don't hesitate to send it to them. Thank you for tuning in, and I so appreciate you all. It is only together that we grieve, and it's only together that we heal. Take care of everybody.